Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Pennsylvania Wine Society virtual wine tasting. I'm Marty Cook, and we have a very special program today. We are featuring Presque Wine Cellars, which is one of the oldest wineries in Pennsylvania. I think the third oldest. And with us today is who will be presenting for them is Bob Green, the executive winemaker, and Bob's he can give you a little background on his bio. He's been a winemaker for 35 years at Presque, so he knows of which he speaks. And with that, I will ask you to keep your mics muted until the end of the program, when we will have an open mic segment. Bob and I had talked about during the presentation, if there is sufficient interest and there are sufficient questions, we may actually ask you to go ahead and open your mics and talk. So we'll if we do that, we'll ask you then after you ask your question to mute your microphone once again. So Bob, if you're ready, please take it away.
Hey, Marty, thanks. I guess I'm ready. Good to see everybody here, and thank you all for coming. And also, I want to say thank you to Marty for organizing this, and the PWS for organizing this series in general. I think it's a great idea that they're including wineries from the state. And, you know, as we'll say a champion of the Pennsylvania wine industry, they're one of the best groups that we have. So hats off to them, and make sure that you keep them going and support their programs. Hopefully they'll be able to get back to in-person programs, which I've been to before, and they're also wonderful. So nice job, PWS, and nice job, Marty as well. Yeah, so just a couple of things. As Marty mentioned, please keep your microphones muted. I think everybody is now. That's just to keep it from getting distracting. By the way, I also teach at the college, and what happens is I tend to, I know what happens when mics aren't muted and things get really crazy. So I will not hesitate to step in if I hear dogs barking in the background too much, for example. If you have questions as we're going along, the easiest thing, at least during the presentation part of it, is to just put them in the chat. I pay attention to that, and I'm pretty good at just kind of watching it. And if something comes up, I'll try and answer it as I go along. So please don't hold back. If there's something that I'm missing that you think you'd like to hear about, let me know, and we'll go ahead with that as well. So let's talk about, well, I guess Presque. We'll start off with that. And it established in 1964. So this was actually prior to when Pennsylvania allowed, we'll say it in a practical way, wineries in the state. And it essentially was a partnership between two people, Doug Moorhead, who I'll talk about a little bit later, probably many times through here, and Bill Connerth. And both of them were home winemakers. Doug had grapes that he had been growing kind of as a person, that was his business. It was the family farm that goes back several generations prior to him. But he had gone over to Germany during the war and came back and said, we got a similar climate. We could grow grapes here as well that were kind of these traditional wine grapes. And so that's how he got started in the wine part of it, is just from that observation. Came back, planted some vinifera, working with Dr. Frank from the Finger Lakes, who was a champion of vinifera in the East, as well as Philip Wagner, who was the editor of the Baltimore Sun at the time, and also was a champion of hybrids. And it's my understanding that Philip Wagner and Dr. Frank did not get along well because they saw things totally different. And Doug, being the person who he was able to take the two mindsets and ways of going about the wine industry and putting them together. And so we have vinifera established, and we also have hybrids, as well as the native grapes. I mean, we can't discount those. So anyway, Bill and Doug back in the 60s decided that they wanted to help out local winemakers. And so they created the Lake Erie, or actually it was the Erie County Wine Club, which is still in existence. In fact, I'm a member of it. And in this wine club, Bill and Doug got together and they started buying supplies for everybody in it. And at some point, probably very quickly, they realized we could make money at this. And so they established a winery. They were looking for a name for it, and they came up with something like Connerton Moorhead and decided that would never fly. So they abandoned it altogether. They went to a local Erie County landmark, which is Presque, and that became then Presque Wine Cellars. So no relationship to Presque other than they liked the name, the Presque being the peninsula that's out in Lake Erie. They quickly realized that they could sell outside of the immediate area. And so, and somehow they were able to set up a mail order business to this as well. So now they were in the process and in the business of ordering and mailing equipment and supplies for amateur wineries. And at that time, there was, I think, one other one in the country that was doing that. So they were kind of leading the way in that. With the farm that Doug had, he also was able to supply local grapes. They put in a press house on the farm and they made juice and sold fresh juice to winemakers. And also probably to some of the small wineries that were starting to get after we got into the winery, which is coming next. So wineries at this time, back in the, say, 1964 to 1968, were not yet legal, or at least they were impractically legal. Let's put it that way. It's maybe the best way. So the business still carries on in this way, by the way. It's still a major supply company across the country, both for home winemakers and also small commercial wineries. So you know, that part of the business still continues. And we've also added the wine and also have gotten, you know, more into it. So let's talk about Pennsylvania, because it's kind of interesting. Of course, Pennsylvania went through Prohibition like everyone else. And when Prohibition was ended at the federal level with the 21st Amendment, it was actually the alcohol control was given over to each individual state. And so at the time in Pennsylvania, the governor was Gifford Pinchot. And he purportedly made the statement that his purpose in establishing the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board, which was the agency that he set up to oversee the sale, the manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverages in the state, their mission was to make it as inconvenient and expensive as possible. So in other words, Pennsylvania really didn't want to let go of Prohibition. Of course, we know that the PLCB has continued to be the operating arm. However, to their credit and to the legislature's credit as well, things have really opened up. And in some ways, Pennsylvania, for wineries anyway, is not too bad. And, you know, and it has to do with distribution through the state stores. Because, for example, if I want to sell to a state store, I can deliver to the warehouse in Pittsburgh, and it covers half of the state. If I were to do that in New York, I'd have to go to every little wine shop in half the state of New York in order to sell my wine in that way. So there are some benefits to it. But let's go back in time again. So we're pre-1968, which is when the law changed. So in 1963, before we had the Limited Winery Act, we had a winery open. It was Conestoga Vineyards. They had to sell all of their product through the PLCB. And if they wanted to even have product for themselves, so the family and their dinner table, they had to go to a state store and buy it from them. So they could not even make it for themselves. All right. So this created some problems. In other words, their distribution was only through the PLCB. In 1967, there were several growers in Erie County in Pennsylvania, and they were contemplating starting wineries. One of them was Doug Moorhead. And there were also several others that ultimately ended up starting Penn Shore vineyards. And we'll talk about Penn Shore here pretty quick. But they got together and they started working with different legislators in the area. And they were able also to get the Department of Agriculture on board. So the Secretary of Ag at the time thought this was a good idea, and so they bought into it. In 1967, the PLCB opposed this completely because part of the provision was that wineries that came under this new law would be allowed to sell directly to consumers. In other words, they would bypass the PLCB. They could also sell directly to licensees, again, bypassing the PLCB. And so the PLCB strongly opposed it, and in fact succeeded in killing it through 1967. 1968 came along, they reintroduced it to the floor, and I'm told that on the 11th hour of the last day of session, it came up for vote, and it made it. And so at that point in 1968, I believe it was August, the legislation passed and the Limited Winery Act in Pennsylvania became a reality. And essentially, what it did was it allowed a commercial winery to make wine from Pennsylvania-grown fruit, and it could be sold directly to consumers and also to licensees. So this was kind of what they were looking for, in that it allowed for basically a small winery to start up, do tastings, do sales, sell to restaurants. In other words, exactly what we see here. The original license required that all of the fruit come from Pennsylvania. You know, it makes sense in a certain way. However, when the interstate commerce provision came in, they realized that it could not be enforced in that way because it was discriminatory to out-of-state producers. And so they essentially had to scrap that, as many other things, or at least not scrap them, but they just couldn't enforce them. And so a lot of things changed. This is probably 10 years ago or whatever. And one of the things that they did was they allowed out-of-state fruit to be used. Ostensibly, a winery had to purchase a permit to do so, and they could use up to 25% of their production could come from out-of-state fruit. All right, and that's reasonable, you know. And also the fruit had to be within 300 miles of the winery, by the way. That was somewhat interpreted for some reason to be 300 miles of the Pennsylvania border, which expands the range quite a bit because Pennsylvania is a big state. Again, it's one of those things that it's not heavily enforced. And so unfortunately, we find a lot of wineries who are using non-Pennsylvania or non-regional fruit for production. And, you know, we could get into the politics of that, and I'd probably rather not, but I will say personally, I think that that does a disservice to the state as well. In terms of shipping, we can now ship anywhere it's legal for a person to receive it, as long as we have a direct shipper's license. The other thing is that they opened this up to non-Pennsylvania wineries as a way to get around the interstate commerce clause. And so basically, there's one California winery that holds a Pennsylvania limited winery and allows them to sell directly to consumers in Pennsylvania. I guess if it's worth the hassle of getting a winery license in that way, go for it. Let's talk about wine at Presque, and I guess this is kind of where I come into the picture. Let me back up a little bit. I had mentioned Penn Shore, and so when the Limited Winery Act was passed in 1968, 2 licenses were issued on the same day. One was Penn Shore, and the other was Presque. And there's somewhat of a debate about who was first. And my guess is that Penn Shore is probably first because Penn Shore comes alphabetically before Presque by virtue of an E before an R. So, you know, it doesn't matter really. In fact, we both were starting on the same day. We were the first 2 commercial wineries licensed under the Pennsylvania Limited Winery Act. And by the way, both wineries are still in business in the same place as they were back then. So I think that speaks to the kind of the resiliency of the market and also of the wineries themselves. So back to Presque Isle. I started working there in 1983. So Presque Isle had already been going about 15 years at that point. In terms of wine sales, it was about 2% of the business when I started, right? So the 98% of it then was fresh juice and grapes as the business started out, and also winemaking supplies and equipment. So here we're talking about, you know, a sizable business, but a very tiny winery. I think we had 1983 was a big crop year. I remember it actually very well. And we were putting barrels and tanks everywhere we could inside the cellar. It's not a large cellar. And I think we hit 10,000 gallons that year, which was by far the biggest they'd ever made in terms of wine. So, you know, nowadays we're much bigger than that. But at the time it was like, wow, this is a lot of wine. So in terms of what we're doing now, we've grown to over 500 tons of grapes a year. And our production is basically about 40,000 gallons of wine. That does not include juice and grapes that we sell direct in that way. So obviously, we're not bottling 40,000 gallons. We're still bottling about 10,000 gallons a year and selling in that way. The rest of it is being sold as bulk wines to other commercial wineries. So that actually is a huge part of the business. And you can see that, you know, like I've got several vinifera here, Blanc Frankish, Cabernet Franc, in this particular little barrel room. And these will be used for our own wines. We also sell them to commercial wineries as part of their production as well. We're also increasing our production. And at this point, we are now pretty much across the state. We have a representative in Pittsburgh who is also branched out and now is selling in central Pennsylvania. And we are just now opening up the same type of distribution in the Philadelphia area. So we've been in Philly before, and we're hoping to get back into it again with some of our wines. In terms of me, a little bit, I don't like to talk about myself, but I think it's important, and this is really why it's important right here. And so this is Doug and Marlene Moorhead. And shortly after, it was before I came, so before 1980s, somewhere in there, Bill Connor, who was Doug's original partner, retired. He built a little house across the creek from the winery, and so I saw him quite a bit. But Doug and Marlene came into the business at that point as a partner, and both of them ran the business. And in terms of like my education, like why am I a winemaker? It's kind of interesting because the way it worked out was a friend of mine in college who was a year ahead of me had graduated, and he took a job with a Penn State research station in Northeast. And they primarily do vineyard work. In fact, that's all they do. And at the time, they were doing like scouting and kind of working with developing a grape berry moth, which is a kind of a notorious pest on grapes. And so Craig, who was my friend, his job during the summer was to go out and scout the vineyards and check the traps and see, you know, they were trying to get the phenology of what was happening with grape berry moths over the years, you know, or through the course of the growing season. So anyway, he worked through the summer there. I was still in college. And then he needed a job after the summer and somehow got hooked up with Doug and Marlene at the Presque Isle. And lo and behold, he worked there through harvest, told me about it. And I thought, that sounds really cool. So in the following spring, I approached Doug and I said, I'm going to Europe for several months when I get back. Could you give me a job through harvest? And he said, sure. Show up. So I did. I got back from Europe a couple days later. I showed up and he put me to work pretty much right from there. And I remember working for about half a day in the supply end of it, and then wandered out onto the press pad where they were pressing grapes. And at that point, I said, this is it. And I never left, at least for 9 months. So I worked under Doug and Marlene for 9 months, and then took a job down in South Carolina in what I thought I wanted to do, which was aquatic biology. Realized that I didn't after 2 years, came back up, and I remember calling Doug and saying, Doug, I want to come back to Pennsylvania from South Carolina. Would you take me back? And he goes, sure. When you get back, let me know. And I did, and I started back again. Worked with him for, I don't know, I think about 20 years at that point. Started teaching college level and doing consulting, and then eventually left that, and they called me back and said, why don't you come back? We need someone to help make wine. I said, I'd love to. So I came back and worked with Doug again. Marlene at that point had retired, and so Doug was still at the helm. So the important thing about this, and kind of the real reason why I'm saying it, is it really has very little to do with me. It has more to do with these two that are in this picture. In terms of like my education, everything I learned about wine, or at least most of it, started with Doug and also Marlene. And they were both active in the cellar. They were both, I remember doing tastings with them that just absolutely made my head spin sometimes, because the wines that we had were incredible. And they would crack them open, and we would sit down and taste them and talk about them. And I learned so much about wine just from being in their presence that way. They extended that also into the industry, and so they were known on the East Coast. And so the East Coast in wine speak means from the Rocky Mountains east, by the way. They were known for basically helping anybody who needed help, and also doing everything they could to further the wine industry in the area. And so, you know, it's like, I call it the legacy of Doug and Marlene, and it's true. You know, in some ways, Presque is still a leader. We're still out there, you know, providing as much support and equipment and supplies as we can to the industry, and I hope we continue to do that for a long time. And you know, I know for me, the mentorship and the education I got from them is huge, and I would hope that everybody has a chance to have someone in their life like that, that kind of, you know, when something comes up, they can go and find out about it. And if they don't know, then, you know, Doug's favorite thing was, well, let's go find out. And off we would go into the books to find the answer to it. So, you know, in that way, he taught me a lot about many things. So anyway, that gets us through kind of, I suppose, the background of where we are. If you have questions, we can certainly entertain them maybe after we get on with the tasting. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for tasting. And you know, like I say, we're going to start off with the Pinot Blanc. We have 3 wines: Pinot Blanc, Grüner Veltliner, and the last one is the Carmine. And you know, I can talk a little bit about them. Kind of the idea here behind this tasting was I am really excited about the 2020 wines. To me, they're just phenomenal. The season, at least for us, by the way. You know, I'm talking about Lake Erie region, which is that little area up right along the shoreline in Pennsylvania. It's Erie County. It also extends into Chautauqua County and a little bit into Erie County, New York, so just south of Buffalo. If you go west, you end up in Ohio, and the Erie County or the Lake Erie region goes all the way across almost to Toledo. So it's a long, about, I think it's either 200 or 300 miles long, probably closer to 300, I guess. And in some places it's about 3 miles wide. So it's very narrow. In Westfield, New York, just up the road from me, it's where it's about the narrowest. It's defined by Lake Erie, of course, to the north, and to the south is the Lake Plain. It goes up the hill, which in the top of the hill, the ridge, we call it the escarpment, and that kind of ends it. And so if we go like, well, even today, you know, it's bright and sunny here, it's in the 50s. If I were to get in the car and drive 3 miles south of me right now, I would cross over Interstate 90. I would leave the Lake Erie Plain, and the temperature would probably be 10 degrees warmer because the lake is keeping us cold. In the fall, it's the opposite, right? So the lake keeps us warm in the fall and gives us a longer season. So back to the wines, back to Lake Erie. So Pinot Blanc, this is grown by John and Cindy Moorhead and their son Mike. And it's also with kind of a sad note that John Moorhead passed. He was in his mid-80s about 2 weeks ago. And so, we kind of have this kind of big hole right now left by him, and his son Mike and Cindy certainly will do what they can to step into it. But John was a big guy and a phenomenal grower. He also was one of what Dr. Frank called his cooperators. So back when Doug was working with vinifera for the first time, John Moorhead, who by the way is his fifth cousin, also was working with those. In 2004, so this would be about 15 years ago, they planted 1/8 of an acre. And essentially, it's like one row of grapes. They're constantly trying out on this particular vineyard, they're always trying out new varieties. And Pinot Blanc was one. They wanted to see how it would do. So they planted this. They have about 80 acres. And true to most of the farms around us, the vineyards, a lot of them were Concords. They have been slowly replacing Concords over the years, and they're now less than half Concords and becoming more of a vinifera grower than anything else. So let's talk about, while we're doing this, also 2020. So it was kind of a sleeper of a year in a certain way. It started out cold. It didn't seem like it was ever going to get warm. We've had these patterns the last several years where, like in April, it starts getting cold again. March sometimes is nice, and then April gets cold and it stays cold, and we get into May and it's like, is it ever going to warm up to spring? And to kind of, I can give you a definite date because on May 7th of last year in 2020, my first grandson was born. And it snowed that day. All right, so, I mean, this is May. It shouldn't be snowing yet. Here it was snowing in May. And I know it was May 7th because of his birth. So, but then, all right, so it gets kind of cool. And then we got into June and things started going, it's a little bit like summer now. And then by the time we got to July, it has been the most gorgeous summer I can remember. We had sun almost constantly. It was temperatures in the 80s, perfect weather, just absolutely beautiful weather and dry, but we had rain now and then, just enough to keep mostly out of the drought stress. So what this meant was when we got into August and it kept up like this in September, and it kept up like this in October, and it kept up like this, we ended up with some of the most ripe fruit that I've seen, and also almost absolutely disease-free. So, I mean, this is like perfect, we saw ripeness like we've never seen. It's one of the few years where when I go out and start talking to the vineyard people, we'd look at like, well, how are these grapes doing? Well, they look pretty good. All right. Well, let's look at them in a couple of days. And so I come back in a couple of days, they still look good. And normally it's like, all right, they're starting to show some disease. Hey, it's starting to rain in the next 3 days. We need to get these off now. And it's like, we didn't have any of that. It was more like, let's just kind of hang back and see what happens here. So the picture here, this is the Pinot Blanc from this year. And you can see it's got some gorgeous fruit on it. Absolutely stunning. And this was getting like maybe at the point or even past where we normally would have harvested it. So I just kind of let it go. And this is exactly what we ended up with. So I see Dave's question there about charred wood. We'll get into that here in just a second. Well, actually, let's talk about it now. So because it's only 1/8 of an acre, I don't get a whole lot of fruit off it. And I think I had about 100 gallons or so that I had to work with. And actually, what my plan was before we got into even variation in September was I was going to use this wine as a base for sparkling wine because we tend to have to ripen it, or pick it fairly early. It gets botrytis in it. And it's like if we let it go too long, it usually just falls apart. it didn't happen this year. We kept looking at it going, you know what? We're just going to let it go. Let's see what happens if we can get it right. And it did. So I ended up taking it in, and we ended up, had it in the cellar, and I was tasting and going, this is really kind of interesting. It had a little bit of botrytis in it, and there's some of that funkiness that comes through, I think, in the nose. And I said to my cellar hand, I said, let's play around with this a little bit. We only have 100 gallons. Let's just have some fun. So I said, grab some oak chips, some French oak, medium toast, pop them in there and see what happens. So he did. And we let him sit there, and everyone's like, oh, I really like it. And I said, no, it's got too much oak in it. And so we pulled the oak way back. So Dave, to answer your question, the charred wood nose on this is actually oak chips that were added to it. I could have barrel aged it, but I really didn't want to get into that kind of fussiness, I guess I'd say. And also my cellar's full. We took in a huge crop because of the conditions, and I took in more reds than I ever have because they were all really nice. So, it's an experiment in a certain way. I kind of like the way it comes off. I was talking with Marty beforehand, and what we basically realized, or what I realized, was that this has been in bottle for about 2.5 weeks now. So not actually a long time. So maybe what we can do, I'll take this off so we can actually see something. And I think if we can make it work, and I know we can, what I'd like to do is kind of open it up, and instead of using the chat, if you want to say something, an easy way to say something is just push the space bar. It'll take you off mute, and then you can speak. And then when you let go of the space bar, it mutes you again. Yeah, so Dave, good point. It says it's a commute the fruit component. It's interesting, but not typical. Absolutely. It's not typical. I don't consider this typical for us, and that's why I'm kind of playing around with it. What I'm actually expecting in this is, like, I'm planning on throwing a case down in the cellar and leaving it there for several years. What I found with our Chardonnays is that in certain years, and most years, give them 10 years in the bottle and they totally change and turn into something that's actually really nice. And so that's kind of what I'm wondering if this will be. Like I say, it's an experiment. You guys, by the way, are guinea pigs, and I'd love to get feedback on it. I think it's interesting, and I think it has a lot of potential. I think once that oak gets a little more integrated into it, just through bottle aging, I think we'll find some more of that fruit coming through and some of the tertiary aromas also developing. So that's my hope. Ask me in 5 years and we'll see if it's true. The other thing I've noticed, like I opened this, I don't know, maybe about close to an hour ago, and poured just a little bit, capped it back up. But it's opening up as it sits in the glass too, and some of that. Yeah, I think time will help this. And it may be even that it's time is like a year from now. I think it might be even better. We'll see. I'm picking up just a tiny bit of VA in there, which, if it was a red, we kind of go, oh, that's interesting. And this, it almost stands out as a note that could complicate things. We'll have to see. My guess is it won't be around very long unless people put it away, because we don't have much of it. But now that it's been in the glass for, 15 minutes, it's actually opening up quite a bit, and more of the fruit is coming back in it. Anyone else have comments or?
It's fun because it's not totally fruit forward, which is really kind of cool in a white wine like this. It's really young, just different than a lot of what we get on the East Coast sometimes with the fruit forwardness.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's kind of why I talk about the food friendliness of this. Like this would be even now it would go well with food. I think better than like sometimes when things are too fruity, it's like that dominates, and then you have to come up with something that can actually balance it out. And like a little bit of oak in something, and then put it with something that's got butter in it. And it's like the world is good. I mean, there's nothing gets better than that. So I think there's ways that the clean fruit forward sometimes is a detractor as well. All right, so I'm saying what's the TA and residual sugar and pH? I'll have to get back to you on that because I've got that information. I can look it up actually. Maybe when we get back to a certain point, I think I've got I might have it here, I might not. I'm not at the winery and I've got it on the bottom of the sheet. I was going to grab that information and forgot it. What I will say is that the residual sugar is bone dry. So I've not added any back to it. I did not stop fermentation, so it's dry. So good with Thai food, yeah. I think it would be, and good mouthfeel. I agree. I like the mouthfeel of this. I like the crispness, but there's also a fullness to it. Like the finish to me is really nice on this. Yes, it is available to buy. We can. I guess if you're tasting it, that means you were able to buy it already. And yes, it is on the. It should be available on the website very soon if it's not already. So, and I know it's been. If you're out of the state, it's in Vino Shipper, so everything there should be ready to go too. So we can ship wherever we need to.
Hey, Bob, I have a question about, do you recommend we chill this wine or not?
Well, that was a question that came up when Marty and I were talking. What I did was I took these, I put them in the refrigerator, early afternoon. So they've been in there, they're cold. I have the Gruner sitting in one of those insulated wine keeper things, like the cheap plastic things that help keep it cold. The Pinot Blanc I set out on the table right beside me here at room temperature because I want it to warm up. So refrigerator, I think, is too cold. I think, and as it's warmed up, it's gotten like I'm getting more aroma out of it now than I did earlier. So I would say, my favorite temperature for just about any wine is I get down in the basement and I pull it and I bring it upstairs. It's good, and especially this time of the year. It's a little bit cooler. Even in the summertime, it is. So no, if you put it in the refrigerator, it's going to warm up in your glass. The advantage to that sometimes is that it just kind of expresses more as you kind of get into it. And that's kind of fun. Otherwise, if you're going to drink it cold, you're missing half the flavor because it just, cold is anesthesia to our senses. And so it just knocks everything down. It would come across as kind of, I don't know, boring, sharp, thin. Let it fill out. It's a nice wine once it kind of opens up a little bit. So that's what I would do with it.
By the way, Bob, going back to the question about purchasing, so we should have mentioned at the beginning, all three of these wines, and I think it was mentioned in the announcement, all three of these wines are actually early release to us, or pre-release, if you will. So we're enjoying these before the general public.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so the Pinot Blanc and the Carmine are, I guess we call that early release. So in other words, they're just going on the market now. you're the first group really to taste them. In fact, you're the first ones to get them. They haven't been even put on the shelves yet at the winery. The Gruner is pre-release, and that is not ready to go out the door quite yet. We'll see where that goes, but we're not quite there yet. So where are we at on time here, Marty? Should we move on to the next one, or is there
Yeah,
anything else?
sure. We're doing fine,
They can
Bob.
always come back to it.
We have plenty of time.
Yeah, good. All right. Next one, Gruner Veltliner.
This has become one of my favorites.
I think Gruner is one of I've been impressed with Gruner as they come from both Lake Erie and also the Lehigh Valley. Gale and Glen has a phenomenal one, and ours also. We've had some that have been very good, and this comes off the vineyard of Alan and Jody Rassi. And so again, Lake Erie, it's in Northeast Township. This is one of those vineyards where, it's kind of like Moorheads are more automated. They've got state-of-the-art pickers, and, everything is done like on a big scale. And with Alan and Jody, I find them out there by hand doing everything. And so, the quality is always good. This is again the 2020, right after they'd gone through and thinned the leaves on it a little bit around the fruit. These are like hand-tended little, we'll say they're babies that they're out there playing with. They have 1.5 acres of it, so it's not like it's a small vineyard. They planted it in 2008, which I think puts them about number 3 in terms of plantings in the country, according to what Alan and I were talking about. We planted this in 2008, and not to, I don't know, I guess I had recommended it to them. I said, we should consider this variety. I'm not even sure why, if I remember right, except that I remember reading about it and hearing that this might be a good variety for our climate. And I said, let's try it. And they were willing, and they put it in a small experimental plot. I remember we looked at the fruit that came off first, and we we're just like, this stuff is gorgeous. Big clusters, very loose, and so very little disease pressure. The question was, can we ripen it? And the answer is yes, we can. This is the 2020. It's bottled early. It was in the tank, and I said, all right, let's get this bottled. I want to capture it exactly as it is right now. It's just like an incredible nose on it. I don't want to say too much about it. I'll let you taste it. 2019, a couple of weeks before this, we got notification that we got a double gold on our 2019 Gruner Veltliner at the San Francisco Chronicle tasting. The 2020 was put into the Monterey International Wine Competition, and it silver medal there. It had been in the bottle about a week, I think, when we put it in. So it's opened up quite a bit and changed quite a bit, even since when we bottled it. So let's try this one. Different animal for sure. And so Gary says I could drink this all day. I could too. Actually, this is one of my favorite wines right now. Someone described Gruner, and it may have been Jancis Robinson, but I'm not sure. I won't swear to it. It's basically a green salad with lime dressing on it. And I think this is like a green salad with lime dressing on it.
Very nice job, Bob.
I will say this is the grower. This is not the winemaker. My job in 2020 is to get the heck out of the way. And I'm serious about that. I think we can play with these wines too much and really lose something. Um, so, we had this conversation, and the question arose about refrigeration. This wine, I'd love to have it a little bit colder than it is right now. I think it's got so much intensity that I think we can back it off a little bit and still be okay and chill it down. It would be crisp. It would be refreshing. Someone mentioned making me anxious for summer. You bet. Wouldn't this be nice? So Dave, I don't know about the petrol nose in it. It's got the lime that I associate with Gruner, and I'm wondering if it's just because these guys were ripe to the degree that they did. So let me talk a little bit about ripeness on these. I went back, like if you look at the alcohol, it's only 11% on it, and in terms of bricks, it really did not top out at high bricks. In fact, I was like almost disappointed when I saw it because I thought, well, it's not very, very good. But what we had in 2020 during the growing season was a lot of sun. And I think a lot of sun does more in terms of producing grapes that have these like exceptional flavors to them, more so than anything else. And so like we may not have gotten a lot of sugar accumulation, but I can always adjust that. And I probably did in this a little bit. Like one of the early things I learned was you can adjust sugar, but don't go too much. And so, if I bring it up 8 bricks unit, that's about it. And so that gets me into the ballpark. But what's important is that the flavors there, the aromatics are there. If the aromatics aren't there, I'm screwed because I can't add them. There's no way. And so this actually comes in, I think a lot of aromatics, and so yeah. Interesting comment by Jeff. So you have some of this juice that you got, okay? Yeah, we had just 1 tank of it. W15, I don't even remember what yeast we used. I'd have to go back and look. I'm wondering if this does have some residual sugar. If it is, it may be, is a stopped fermentation or a stuck fermentation, or it just kind of stopped where it was, and it's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Because I think with the richness of fruit in it and everything else, it just adds to the body, it adds to the intensity of it. It helps kind of make it a very, I don't know, it's just a nice wine. Dave, I think bricks actually was somewhere between 19 and 20. So like I say, it's not huge. And yeah, Pat, the wine does change. Like I'm getting what was grapefruit goes into lime. It's like this, the very clean, very bright lime zest. I'm not surprised that I would expect the minerality in the petrol like Riesling, and I think that that's indication of that the grapes were really ripe physiologically. In other words, the skins develop the flavor. That's where it comes from. It's like sugar is not an indication of a good indication of ripeness always. Yeah, so Cindy, it is, I pick up on the sweetness of that, but then it's balanced by the acidity, and the finish is actually a very crisp, very clean finish. Well, I know what I'm having for dinner tonight. At least one of them. I got 3 wines open. This is great. I know I just have to figure out what to fix for it, right? So I know I'm tempting you with this, but it's not being released quite yet. We still have the 2019, which limited quantity of that. We only bottled about 35 cases of the 2019. The 2020, I have over 100 cases. So it should be available for quite a while. The 2019 is very good. It's a little bit leaner, not quite as full and kind of effusive as this one is. So if you want to try another, I think it's very good. It has a lot of that lime in the finish, just not quite the richness to it and the fullness of it. So, but also a very nice wine. That one is available. Yeah, Laura, it's funny, when I first tasted this, the thing that struck me, it was like, I remember smelling a nose and going, wow, that's got a really interesting nose. And it was right after it was bottled. And it kind of came across like this, like hay dried straw type of nose. I'm like, this is weird. And then it went into the kind of I don't know, even a funky aftertaste. And then all of a sudden it opened up. And what I described it as was like that sweet tart lime Kool-Aid just exploded. And that's when I thought, this is a really nice wine. I like this, and let's get a bottle. So that was the moment when I thought, okay, 2020 is going to work out all right for us, and I hope 2021's that way too.
Bob, is there something you can hone in on that happened in the 19 and the 20 vintage that kind of brought those two above what it was in the past, or has it really always been this good and now it's just finally getting the recognition it deserves?
I mean, we've had Gruners in the past that have been, gold medals, double gold, several years ago, and so it's not unusual. I think the thing that strikes me about this grape is, even in crappy years, it's okay. So we've always made something that I've been, it's good, and we have some that do well. What I'm seeing is it likes sun. If we have sunlight, then we can ripen it, and we can get those flavors that it really needs, which is the lime. You think about Austrian climate, they're warmer, sun, they're continental climate. We're more maritime climate, which means we kind of have to deal with the humidity more. We're a little bit cloudier, but we're also more regulated, whereas we don't get the kind of the heat. In 2020, 2019, we had heat and sun also. So that's kind of the key thing here. It's probably also timing, like we need heat after veraison. So let's talk about August, September, October. If we have good months, then we're where we need to be. But that's one thing I will say about Gruner, is that it is consistent for us, if nothing else.
Hey, Bob, I got to work with some really nice Gruner this year too. We got a little bit from Stony Run, and it's very similar in the fruit that it expresses. Also really ripe, and we kind of did it in a different style, but I think we're onto something with this particular grape varietal in Pennsylvania.
I think so. I agree with that, Kyle, and I think especially in northern. We're talking Lehigh Valley, even Stony Run outside Kutztown, in Lake Erie. And also, if you go into Ohio along Lake Erie, they've got some nice ones over there too. So, I think it's one that we need to really pay attention to, and see where we can go with it. See what we can do to make it the best, because it's a nice wine, really nice wine.
There's some growing in Maryland as well.
Yeah, and so the question would be, once we get down into the warmer climates, is it the same? Like where because the difference between Lehigh Valley, Lake Erie, and southern Pennsylvania is huge. There can be some real differences, and just because it grows in one part of Pennsylvania does not mean it's going to grow in another.
I'm wondering if the slightly warmer climates, if it just gets a little bit too herbaceous and grassy or asparagusy, if there's a kind of a latitudinal butter zone.
Well, I'm wondering, it's a good question. I don't know that. I haven't tasted enough from around the East Coast, I guess, or even West Coast. I assume they have some out there as well. It would be a good study, and I may have to do that just to. I know we have some of the winery from mostly Pennsylvania, New York, but also Austria that we're going to at some point crack open and do a comparison. So.
The Gruner down at Black Ankle Vineyard has a totally different presentation, probably because of the climate.
That would be interesting to find out what it's like. Absolutely. That's what I'm talking about. I think Chamberson, another variety that it's grown and kind of touted as like Pennsylvania's great, but it's, it's too late season for us. We cannot ripen it. And they're best when they're rosés for us. Down south, it's a different story. So I think we need to like, and it's happening, but we need to take Pennsylvania and break it apart and recognize that there are different growing regions within it, and there's going to be different things with every growing region. And so what works in one place is not going to work in another. Shall we move on? Are we ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, well, let's do it then. Marty's ready. Let's be ready. Right, on to the Carmine. So here's a question. How many people there have actually had Carmine before as a varietal? Never. Steve has. Yeah, it's interesting. If you go online and you look it up, you find that there's some planted in California, and actually where it's known for is Pennsylvania. And there's like maybe 2 vineyards or 3 vineyards in Pennsylvania. And so it's kind of interesting. It was developed by Harold Olmo back in 1930. And the stories that I've read is that it actually was kind of at the behest of Philip Wagner, who wanted something that would grow in the East that would be Cabernet Sauvignon-like. And so Olmo did his crossings and he came up with this. And actually the other part of this is that from what I heard, he developed it for cool climate area. Cool climate California is warmer than we are. So I just looking at kind of the comments that people put in, nobody except for a couple of people have tasted it at our place. I think Faro Vineyards has it. I'm not sure who else does in the state. But in terms of, Olmo, he crossed it in 1936. I think it was released actually in the early 1960s. About, I think it was 1963 or somewhere around there. In terms of its parentage, so it's a vinifera cross, which means it's not a hybrid really. But he took Cabernet Sauvignon, crossed that with Carignan. So that would be one parent across from that. So Cabernet Sauvignon and Carignan are technically grandparents. And then Merlot would be the other parent. So the cross between Cabernet Sauvignon and Carignan, which is not named, is crossed with Merlot to give us this particular variety. And if you look at that, you think, well, there is nothing in those 3 varieties that says this would be a good cool climate wine. Yet it is. So this is grown by John and Cindy Moorhead again, and Mike. They have a 1/4 acre that they planted back in 1992. So this was, I mean, I remember actually the year in 92 when John came over, it was probably 95, I guess. And he had a couple of crates of grapes and he set them down and he said, it's called Carmine, see what you can do with it. 2 crates of grapes, I made 5 gallons. And since then, it's been a consistent producer, at least in terms of we can ripen the fruit more or less. We can make a decent wine from it. The problem is that we only get like a barrel of it. We have 2 barrels this year from 2020. So this has been in barrel. It's been French oak for about 15 months. So a fair bit of barrel aging on it. Yeah, pick up a little bit of VA in it. Let's hope that blows off. The Australians call that a VA lift, and it actually is a way that they enhance the fruitiness. At this point, I'm almost like, it's almost more of a lift, more than a lift. So in terms of flavor qualities, they often describe this as Cabernet Light. And my perception has always been something very different than Cabernet fruit. And I was trying to talk with Marty about it before him. He was talking, and one of the characteristics is almost eucalyptus or minty along those lines. But it's different even than the way that expresses in Cabernet Sauvignon. But also some of the cassis-like flavors that come through in it. Yeah, so the pickle aroma is basically a little bit of ethyl acetate in there. And at the same time, there's going to be some of that carmine fruit quality that also, we'll say, works with that in terms of coming up with the kind of the defined pickle as opposed to just nail polish, a little bit of that. So it's got the fruitiness is different.
Bob, I remember it was either your 2015 or 2016 Carmine. That was the first time I'd ever tried this particular varietal. And that one in particular, I can't remember which vintage, but the first time I smelled it was like, wow, that's like menthol eucalyptus. I'd never smelled anything like that before.
Interesting. So Bob Harris, I'm wondering if you would say a little bit more. You say, I think what I see and what I taste are in conflict. I'm curious to hear what you're talking about that. Which, by the way, not to say that what you're saying is incorrect. I'm just curious.
Go ahead and open up your mic, Bob.
Is expecting more cab. Yeah, and sometimes and sometimes I run into that too. I taste it, and it's like that carmine character. It's hard to define, but Kyle mentioned it there with the eucalyptus, menthol, minty. It goes more in that direction, and so it's not a Cabernet. I think is the best way to say it, and even the structure of the wine is different. The advantage is that it's kind of a it's different, but because of because of its whatever, it does better in cool climates for us. I like Jim's comment. The problem with that comment, Jim, is that we don't have that in front of us either, and so we just have to take your word for it and use our imagination, I guess. But that does sound good. One thing I miss in this area, there is no good bakery, and I wish we had a good bakery because I love good bread. The best we can get is from Wegmans, and that kind of tells you where the standard is.
There used to be a good bakery on Cherry Street, Arnoni's.
Yeah, they don't bake their own bread anymore. And that, the thing about Arnone's is that it's just kind of it's the Italian, probably Sicilian Italian, and so it's a very, very narrow focus. All right, so beef would go well. I would put this with lamb also. Lamb's got the gaminess that would actually, the intensity of flavor in lamb, and do a rare or medium rare roast with lamb, just be perfect. If you do lamb, please do not put the mint jelly next to it, because mint jelly and wine are killers. They will just, the mint jelly will blast the wine out of existence. But good lamb, lots of garlic. Yeah, so Dave, I'm curious, you say it's similar to Cab Franc. Can you narrow Cab Franc down in terms of what, like what style, what region, anything in particular that you're comparing it to? So here we are again, smoked salmon, Gruyere, cheddar with truffles. You guys come prepared. This is great. I suppose that should be the next thing, Marty, is that you have, here's the food that we're going to send out with the wine. So when you do the wine tasting, you also do the food tasting with it.
That would be good.
So, okay, so more French. So we're talking Loire Valley type of Cabernet Franc, which I could see very well. You know, I think Steve makes a good point here that, you know, this is Lake Erie red. And in some ways, I don't feel like that we should be doing much with red wines up here, because we're too cool for them to make really good ones. And if we get a variety like this, then we need to find ways to maximize the potential of it. There are some other varieties that we're working with, Blau Frankish, or Lemberger, depending on how you prefer to call it, is doing well. Playing around a little bit with Zweigelt, which is another German red. So these are cool climate reds, and both of them are doing pretty good. There's a German hybrid called Regent or Regent, if you put the pronunciation on it, from America, and inky black. It might be a Teinturier variety. I don't remember, but it's like deep color, not super big in tannins, but the tannins that are there have a lot of fleshiness to them, and just like tons of fruit. And it's an early ripener. It's almost perfect for us in that way. It's one of the parents of it is Chamberson, and so it has some of those qualities, but it's just for us so much better than Chamberson because of the ripening. Trying to think if there's Chiraldigo, the Italian red, is also one that I've got several barrels in the cellar this year that from 2020 that I taste them every once in a while. I try to keep out of the barrels as much as I can, because but sometimes I just have to, and I'm really impressed with it. And so it's another variety we can be looking at. These cool climate, northern Italian, German grapes are just phenomenal. Pinot Noir, of course, but Pinot Noir is Pinot Noir. And what can we say about that, except it's going to be a heartbreaker 9 out of 10 years.
Do you grow any Dornfelder up there?
I'm sorry, Dornfelder. Yeah, Mike and Cindy Moorhead have Dornfelder, and it's actually one of our best reds. Again, early season ripening. We're picking it mid-September. We can make a nice full-bodied red, and a very good wine. It's actually been a solid middle winner for us. Again, very consistent. So these are some of the things that we're looking at in terms of where we need to go with wine. And I agree, Jim, definitely a food wine. I personally, my preference as a winemaker would be never to make a wine that you could kind of go, oh, I'd just be happy sipping on this wine for the day. I would rather have one that, bring out the food and let's sit down and have a meal together and drink this wine. The Gruner from 2020, all right, no, I'll let that one go, but.
Bob, I think you and I have had this experience when we go to farm to table restaurants and we look at the wine list and there's nothing from Pennsylvania represented. I think one of the things that Pennsylvania wine has to offer that is almost lost in California or the really hot climates is its ability to be very versatile with food. And I think we're starting to have the opportunities again. Obviously, pandemic kind of screwed that up with the restaurant industry. But to find chefs and patrons that are excited about pairing, local talent in the kitchen with the local offerings such as wine, because the acid that we get in red wines lends itself to pairing with, different types of meat preparations, and the acid in white wine stands up to some of those kind of more effusive, like brighter dishes and appetizers and lighter fare and stuff.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it comes down ultimately to education. Like we wine people need to be educating our restaurants what they need to know about Pennsylvania wines, because the common perception, and it's changing, but it's changing slowly, is that we make sweet wines and they're not good quality. And I think that is just it's a travesty. And because there's some very good wines out there that go very well with food, and they should be in our local restaurants. So one way of education is that consumers who go into restaurants, that would be people who like our wines, need to say, why don't you have this wine on the list? Because we need it on the list. It's a good wine. You're missing something here. And really put pressure on restaurants. They will listen to that more so than if I go in and say, here are my best wines. You should have them on your list. So if there's a definite education factor in that. And as an industry, we need to work on it. As consumers, we also need to work on that, because I think there's a lot of potential. And yes, I will agree, there's a lot of sweet wine out there. I make a lot of sweet wine. Why do I do it? Because it allows me to buy $1,000 barrels that I can put, like all these barrels sitting here in the picture that is next to the carving. They're not cheap, and I can afford them because I sell a lot of sweet wine. So in that way, it makes sense. These are some of the things we have to take into consideration as wine producers. But then let's also think about, what do we have in terms of options in restaurants. So sweet wine is Chateau Cash Flow. Yes, that's absolutely true. There was a winery that had a wine called Cash Flow, and they spelled it a CH or CACHE PHLOE or something like that. And it was all about money. So Laura, you have a question here. Please discuss red wine over age coloring barrels. I'm not sure.
I think she's referring to the coloration on the barrels in the photo where the wine has spilled over the outside.
Oh, let me resume. So you're talking about the red wine here on the barrels? If that's the case, that's just because when they filled the barrels, they filled them up and it overflowed, and it makes a red wine stain. Or in this case, in the one barrel here, it looks like maybe the airlock has bubbled over a little bit, probably got cleaned off. Barrels, they get stained, and we let it happen. If you spray down the barrel before you fill it, then the wine tends to run off with the water and it doesn't do it. But obviously the guys didn't do it.
I figured that, this is Laura, I figured that was from topping off the barrels and the overflows to minimize any airspace. But I was also wondering if there's any actual benefit to the oak barrel having some of that wine on the outside, like you just said, versus the water.
Yeah, so actually, I just saw kind of a recap of a study that was done by Cornell many years ago. And we're probably talking 15, 20 years ago, if not even more than that, where they went into wineries and they were doing a sanitation study to see like where in wineries were there sanitary issues. And what they found was this area right around the bung of the barrel was the absolute worst in terms of like the presence of microbes and spoilage organisms. So to answer your question, this is like the worst thing that you can do, is actually have wine there, which is going to support a whole host of spoilage organisms. And so what that means is when we open the barrel, we have to be careful. And one thing is you have a bottle of alcohol in your hand with a sprayer on it. You spray it down before you open the barrel. That then at least will sanitize that area. It's like, we now know that alcohol is a good sanitizer because everywhere you go, we put it on our hands. we've been doing that in the winery for a long time. Every fitting, every valve, every around the barrel, we spray it with alcohol as a way to sanitize it.
Bob, I get a lot of questions from people who see the pictures of European barrel cellars and stuff with the seemingly painted red band around the barrel. And they ask me why I don't do that to my barrels. I said, well, I don't want the cellar to influence the taste of my wine too much.
Right. Basically, I wonder why they do that. Do you know? I don't know.
I always thought it was their secret way of supporting their local Brett population in French cellars.
Okay.
Or maybe it was just for effect. You know, Italians, they like color and they like mood. And
You know, it's a way of finishing off the raw edge of the barrel, actually, because where they paint it is actually the end grain as opposed to the side grain. So there may be some function actually behind it that we don't know about, in truth. Yeah, Erie. So there's a Susan Hanna's question or comment about making a trip to Erie. Erie is, I think, one of the hardest, absolute hardest markets to get into. We have an easier time selling in Pittsburgh than we do in Erie, for many reasons, but they do not consider our wines to be of any value at all. Or why would anybody want them? And you know, we do our best. We have actually one restaurant group that's pretty good. And I just sent them a bottle of the 2019 Gruner. The reason they haven't had it before was the beverage manager basically said, I don't like Gruners, but this is good, but I don't like Gruner. But he's a nice guy.
Can you name the restaurant?
Me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was the Cork. And
Okay.
Yeah, the Cork in Erie. Was that the one you were at?
No.
I don't. Okay.
I was at the one at the fancy hotel right on the water
Oh, the Sheraton.
near the, yes, near it,
Yeah.
near the Maritime Museum.
Yeah. We're working on them. It's just ridiculous, though.
It is ridiculous.
Yep.
And I
Cindy,
even rattled off awards and they blew me off.
Yeah. Yeah. So Cindy's asking who you are, Kyle. And Jonas, can you introduce your guest? I can actually, because it's Kyle Jones, who is a winemaker at Nestle. He is a former student of mine, and I would say I'm you know, sometimes as in the position I put myself as an educator, I kind of go, that guy did well. Kyle did well. So Jonas, you can say whatever you want to about him now. So
I only had negative things to say, so that was nice. That was nice.
that's why I jumped in. I thought it was important that I say something positive first.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a joy to continue to work with you over these years.
Likewise.
But to that end, actually, we source a lot of our fruit from Presque, and we work closely with Bob, and we've been blessed to be able to do that, and has helped influence our reserve program that we've kicked off here at Nestle over the past few years. So Bob definitely has had an influence in our success in that way as well.
Yeah, you know, and I would say that is the legacy of Doug and Marlene, because that was the mindset and the attitude and the way of dealing with wineries that was instilled in me very strongly. And so that's, you know, that I credit them fully for that. That is the Presque model. It is that.
This is probably the end of the program, so we've been doing open mic. So this is, if anyone has anything else you wish to say, please feel free to do so. Open your mic and chat with Bob.
I have a question, Bob. This is Laura in New Mexico. Have you ever been to New Mexico and tried any of our wines, and how do they compare to Pennsylvania wines?
You know what? I haven't been, but here's the thing. In May 14th, we just confirmed this a couple of days ago. We're going to New Mexico. We're going to
Where are you
Santa
gonna
Fe. Santa Fe.
Well, look us up. We have a couple good wineries around here. I don't think they compare to yours. Yours is quite excellent, and thank you for this. But
I'm looking forward to it actually, and I'm hoping to be able to. I don't know if I'll make it to the wineries. I don't know where they are in relation to where I am, but I am so excited about going. You can't imagine, and I hope I get to try New Mexican New Mexican wineries, wines, and yeah. So definitely.
well, that's great. We live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Marty can put you in touch with us if you need a connection, and we can always meet up if you want to or not.
Connections are good.
We have a
Okay.
Gruet tasting room at the St. Francis Hotel in Santa Fe. You probably want to hit that.
Okay. All right.
Gruet tasting room
um,
at the St. Francis.
That would be great. I will try to make a note of that, but I know I'll forget. So I'll check with Marty, and actually, what I'll do is I'll throw my email address in the chat there, and if you want to just shoot me a message, that'd be great.
All right, cool.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, and you know, with the pandemic and all, we've been going back and forth about this whole trip, and my wife and I just got our vaccines last week, and things are starting to free up. We're going with my sister and her husband, and we're getting excited about it. So I'm looking forward to it. Oh, thank you, Michelle. I'm glad you enjoyed the wines. Like I say, these were ones I got excited about too. And sometimes I kind of go at it, but this one, these are all. I'm happy with them. And hopefully we can do a tasting, maybe where we'll see more of the 2020 reds when they come out. It's going to be a while for them. They're just so big, so full, incredible ripeness in a lot of them. Yeah, so thank you all for coming and for providing your feedback, especially. You know, I love to hear what other people think. I love honest opinions about the wines because that helps me. I don't know that I've had too many wines from Temecula, Steve, but thanks, Bob.
Oh, that I should ask. So if anybody on today's tasting is interested in securing any additional bottles of this, Bob, can they will they still be able to take advantage of the discounted price if they use?
I think we can work something out for you on that. Yes, make a mention of it, and I'll let the order takers know that, and we'll work something out. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so whenever they call to place their order, they simply mention it.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, there you go. It's been nice to see everybody on this broadcast.
Likewise. And I'm happy to say that now that the Carmine has aired out a bit, it's actually really nice.
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah. So decanting this, aerating it would be nice. Would be a good plan for this.
And another lesser known grape to add to the list of lesser known grapes we've tried.
So the question is going to talk about my sparkling wine. I've actually done it not for Presque, but I've done it for, well, no, let me take that back. I've only done a couple of Pet Nat sparkling wines at Presque, but I've done sparkling Rieslings at another winery I've worked for many years now. Riesling's a wonderful variety for us in terms of sparkling wines. And I've also used Traminette as another variety. So my preference is Brut style, full aging on the lees as much as I can. If 2021 gives us a normal year, I will be using hopefully a little bit of Chardonnay, but mostly Pinot Blanc in it.
Are you, have you made any more of that port style wine that you were winning prizes with several years ago?
Yeah, so I have a new bottling that we bottled a couple of years ago. I'm not sure exactly when, maybe last year. And I've got, actually I mentioned the region or the Reagan variety earlier, as the German grape, and I put some of that in barrel, fortified it, barreled it. And it is amazing on its own right. And so there probably will be another port style coming out, or port something coming out here pretty soon. I should say pretty soon, sometime. And I think it'll be pretty good. The Regent's coming through with a lot of fruit, a lot of color, nice tannins. And I'll probably blend in some of the older barreled stuff that I have just to kind of fill it out and give it some complexity. So, it's just a fun thing to do right now. In terms of sparkling in stock, yeah, we have a Riesling Pet Nat. I think it was a gold medal winner at either I think it was San Francisco Chronicle. We got a gold medal on that. And by the way, the Pet Nat is called Ancestral Pet Nat or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, we had the folks from Maza on one of our virtual tastings about a month ago, and they also make a pet nat.
Yeah, right. It's a nice way of doing it. Actually, it's kind of cheap. We don't have to worry about clarifying it. We can just bottle it while it's still fermenting and leave it up to you guys to keep it clean. So
kind of cheap. We like to say inexpensive.
It's the lazy man's way of making sparkling wine. Come on. But also the flavors are good, and that's the important part. There's a way you capture that fruitiness that just comes barreling through with those things that you don't get otherwise. Any other comments or questions? I've been really enjoyed doing this, Marty, and you have a great eye. So you guys are great, and I don't know, maybe when we get to a point where we've got some new ones here, get some new wines, maybe we'll do it again.
Or possibly in person again. How's that?
Yeah, that'd be nice too. I'd love to come down. It's been a while since I've done something for you guys. And
yeah, I think the first Pennsylvania Wine Society event I went to was in October of 2016 or 17, and you were the featured speaker.
Oh, I don't. What did I do it on?
You were doing the sensory evaluation.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Hey, Marty, how about having a field trip up there and I can talk about the geology along the way?
Well, you
okay, Debbie's, you guys are all laughing at me, but I think that'd be really fun. We could get a small tour bus or how many ever people sign up, go up there. We can, talk about what we see along the way, have a nice meal, have some wine.
We could see.
Also coming up there, Laura.
Sure. Sounds good to me. Or maybe when Bob's down there, you can in Santa Fe, you can take him out and show him some of the rocks.
We'd be happy to if he's interested. We can show him the different soils and rocks and the wonderful wines we have in New Mexico. But I have to admit that our wines are okay, but they're not as good as the two wines we've had with you, Marty. That first was Maza and now Presque. Very good, really outstanding.
Terrific. I'm glad you enjoyed them. Bob, at the last Eastern Winery Expo, there was a winery from Texas. I don't know if you had a chance to go to their workshop. I think Kyle was actually in that workshop, and they were featuring wines that they were making, fortified wines that they were making from Vitis Estivalis.
Okay, yeah, which would be normal down there. Yeah.
And Laura told me that they're growing that in New Mexico. So.
Okay. So let's see, Cindy says I can present with Averol. But what is she doing?
She is the resident. She is the other resident uh, geologist.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So this isn't directed toward me. It's directed toward Laura. Okay. Got it. Okay. Good.
All right. Well, we're down to 20 people, and it's 5 o'clock on the nose, and so it's 5 o'clock somewhere. It's 5 o'clock here. We're
5 o'clock here. That's right.
We're drinking.
It's actually at this point, it's probably past that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
if
thanks.
does anybody else have anything they'd like to add before I let Bob go? You can certainly open your mics and talk. I know you all have
Again,
voices.
yeah.
I've been on Zoom all weekend with professional workshops. So this was the first one I actually enjoyed. Woo! No, I enjoyed the other ones too. It was wonderful. But, you know, it's this one was for me. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Bob, as a former student, I'm very much enjoying the class. And I got to tell you, this red is superb. It's really good with my corned beef and cabbage right now.
Ah, good. Good. Yeah.
Excellent.
Nice.
Oh gosh.
That was Wednesday's meal because I am Irish. And yes, I definitely had my corned beef and cabbage on Wednesday, but I did not have this wine with them. Now I'm going to have to go do it again.
This is leftovers. Yep.
Yeah. So sorry to twist your arm and make you have to do it again.
All right, folks. I thank everybody for attending.
Thank you, Marty. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Be sure and tune in to one of our Wine Wednesdays. If you're not clued into that, every Wednesday at 7, we have a theme, and for 1 hour from 7 to 8, we go around the room and everybody gets a chance to have their 3 minutes of fame and talk about the wine they're drinking. So we've been getting people from Georgia, New Mexico, California, and I think we've had some people from Canada recently. So all over the United States, even a person from Italy recently.
Yes.
And
Danielle.
so the announcements go out. If you're not on our mailing list, get a hold of me and we'll put you on. But in the meantime, because we will not be doing another Sunday broadcast until the 18th of April, because Easter's in the middle of everything. And but we will be doing the Wine Wednesdays every Wednesday at 7 p.m. So please consider tuning in and saying hi, having a glass with us. All right, Bob, I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bob.
All right. Well, thank you for organizing this for Presque, but also for all the wineries. I know it's much needed, and you guys do a good
It
job.
really is. You're right.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Save me a case for of each one of these.
Hey, you know where we are. You're not far away.
All right, I'm not. Thank you.
All righty. We'll see y'all.
Good night.